Good morning, everyone. Like 13 people. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second Q&A session. Like last time, we have two sessions. The first part technical, the second business related. Gonna wait a couple minutes more. Like last time, to ask a question, you can either raise your hand and I will give you the mic. If you want to discuss anything, it's very encouraged to raise your hand and come on stage. Otherwise, of course, you can ask your question in the question section. I'll read it out loud and one of our speakers can answer. Please don't be shy to ask anything.
Shall I kick off with a couple of questions I've got then? If no one else is coming up directly, Sharifa.
Sure, please, Jason, go ahead.
Okay, first thing which various people have asked me, not necessarily related to this project last week, is actually to do with the app context. It's to do with the JSON LD app context. As you well know, NGSI LD, it's in the name, is an extended subset of JSON LD, and there is this file called I call it the app context file, but it's the one which you refer to in the link header. It's probably got a proper name in the JSON LD specification, but I can never remember it. And it consists of a series of key value pairs. Now, if you read the JSON LD context directly, it states that this app context file is a mapping of terms to IRIs. Terms are what we call, or I call short names, like, temperature. But the IRIs are the ones on the right-hand side of the pair. And several people have asked me, these links don't work. Why? Is it wrong? Is there something missing? And the fact is that because these are IRIs, not URLs, they may or may not resolve to an actual web page. An IRI is an internationalized resource indicator, I think it is. And that means it could be, say, have a Chinese character in it or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a single web page. And indeed, if you have, say, an umlaut in it, then obviously the URL for that which would be obviously URL encoded, would have some sort of percent characters in there. So you can have multiple IRIs which would point to the same URL, obviously the one with the percent character or the one with the U with the umlaut in it, or whatever. So they are not necessarily unique web pages. But the important point is that these are just indicators. It's just saying the agreed long name for this attribute is Sarah temperature or whatever. And therefore, it's not always the case that they resolve to web pages. And indeed, the ones which do it in different fashions as well. If you go to schema.org, which is probably what most of you have done, they resolve to web pages. Fine, okay, not a problem. If you go to look at the GeoJSON definition of, from Perl, it will give you an RDF file to download. If you go to the Etsy URIs from the core context, they won't resolve at all, and so on and so on and so forth. So the important takeaway there is it's not necessarily a link just because it looks like a link. It's actually an identifier. Those of you who are old enough to remember Java will remember the advice you probably got right in your first Java class, to call your class like org dot organization name dot whatever your name tutorial blah blah blah, because that's a reversed unique indicator. It's my company or my organization, and it's the same thing here. That isn't necessarily a website. It is actually just an indication of the organization. Does that make sense? If anyone's still confused about it, I found great difficulty trying to clearly identify the difference between URN, IRI, URI, and URL are. But you can find that out on the internet.
Jason, let me just comment on that. So what you say is absolutely right. So, but it is also true that in the case that we were using an identifier which looks like a web page, I guess that is valuable that this URL will be valid and something will appear related with the term, because that's an opportunity to provide further explanation about this term. So having said that, it is true, it's just an identifier for a long name for any of the terms that we have in the at context. I guess that it's worthwhile to have a web page.
Yeah, it's the difference between a file for humans and a file for computers.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you need the at context for computers to understand what the long names are, but then you get these pesky humans who come in and who look at them and actually might be able to get some human readable information out of them if you actually get your IRIs to resolve to URLs. So yes, it's an opportunity for organizations to push more information out of it. As I said, a good example is the Perl GeoJSON definition, which just gives you the raw RDF file. They haven't made much of an effort to go to a usable website, but you can actually say, okay, obviously GeoJSON's only 20 terms, something like that. So whenever you go onto any of our stuff, you'll get this RDF file, and it's got sufficient information to say what the difference is between a point and a multi-point, for example. It's helpful. Now, one question which I'd really find very interesting, open to the floor, is obviously we've got a wide range of participants taking part here. And is there anyone who'd be willing to identify the sort of data providers which are most likely to be used in the use cases they would be using in I4 Trust? Because obviously, when I was talking back on Tuesday, I was talking about a random farm and vet and what have you. And it's all made up, it's all fantasy. And I was wondering if anyone has got a potential use case where we could have some potential data providers, so we could sketch out and discuss in common how that would actually work in a real live system. So if anyone's got a proper real use case, let's eat into it.
Okay, we have a raised hand. Annette, please come on stage. I can't hear anything. Can you hear anything? Okay, because it says that Annette is currently speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. It was just a video. Sorry. Hi. Yeah, we have a real life use case, but I'm not, say, from the technical part, I'm probably not the best one to speak to. So we would have to do it with my team, but we have that case.
Well, even just talking in broad terms, because obviously the problem that I4 Trust faces is that you need to have an interface between the technical people and the business people to come up with a real life use case. So if you're more on the business side, it would be interesting to know what you have identified as the business need, and then we can actually walk through the idea of saying, well, okay, we could identify that user, we could identify that user, we could identify that participant, and so on and so forth. So it is of interest. I think.
Okay, so let me share. This morning, my team put some, a schema of it, and maybe I should share that. Can I, or then I have to share a screen, or can I share a file? Wait, how do I do that? Oh, wait.
You can share your screen.
Currently, you have as much rights as everyone else apart from Sharifa, because she can just block people and kill people.
Wait, I just get it. One sec. I thought I just had it, but we already exchanged so many messages that I have to scroll back. Ah, here. Right, okay, now let me share. Share screen. Oh, wait, entire screen, no. Oh yeah, right, I suppose, wait 1 sec. Share. I'm not sure whether it's clear, it's because it's a screen share through Skype, going one system to another to another. Can you see it? I don't see it. I see only all of us.
And now you're presenting. You just have to choose another tab. Yes, now.
Can you see it? Oh, great. Thanks.
Yes.
So basically, we have shippers, we have logistic service providers, we have receivers. It all starts with sharing data about the delivery between the shipper and us to have it delivered finally in a box by a logistic service provider. And then we could also opt to open the box and to use the context broker again for that. That would be optional, say, from our perspective.
Now, this is obviously a train the trainers session. So before I butt in and say what Alberto butts in and says what the experts from Fireware would do in this situation, would anyone from the audience care to suggest some of the participants and how they would architect this system? Because obviously the idea at the end of I4 Trust is that someone can walk into your iHub or whatever and say, I want one of these. So you've now got a design on a napkin. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to suggest some of the participants and models which you would use within this system? That way, I don't have to do all the work.
Yeah, from my own limited understanding, I asked them to also paste the iShare thing in, no, the identity provider, the authorization register, etc. That's
now, to me, this seems like quite a logical system to use for I4 Trust, because the fact is that you aren't privileged to all of your logistics providers or your shippers or what have you. You need to request access to their stuff. So presumably they would have their own context broker, and you could then talk to their context broker interface via the I4 Trust. So the bit you've got where it says Fireware Context Broker is presumably your broker rather than their broker.
right.
So you know that I've got the trucks in the road at this position here. However, you would also have entities pushed into your system saying, I don't know, this shipment is coming from so and so, is being processed by so and so. And in that case, you would have some sort of relationship between object, whatever it is, some sort of process order. If you look at the tutorials, there is an example of a bridge table in the working with linked data tutorials, which connects multiple third parties to an entity. It's a logical entity. It says something like, I have a product which is on a shelf, which is in a building, and it says you can link the three here. So that would be of great use for you to be able to work out, okay, this particular order is being processed by X, Y, and Z. And then you would be in need to request the data from your third party. Your third party may or may not be willing to give you the data, depending on how you do the security part of this system. But I would envisage that you would hold within your system entities which are copies of information which has been provided by your logistics provider. So you would have an entity within your system which has got, I don't know, the address of the logistics. But the way that would be received is you would not directly insert the information. What you would do is you would request, and you would expect an upsert into your system from them saying, you know, this is the current status of this package, so that you have got right time information here. You've got the information saying that as far as X logistics is concerned, we have shipped, and that might be 3 hours out of date, but it's got some sort of idea as to how these things work. So it's going to be a mixture of subscriptions, so that you can push stuff, say go off and do something. There will need to be an agreed endpoint to say I need to get information from my third party, and then upsert back into your system. I think the next person to call into this discussion is probably Dennis. In the how would you get the how do you see the architecture working within this system?
Hi.
Maybe I
Yeah.
I can make some comments here.
This is the session I wasn't in, so if I pick the wrong person, it must be Rajiv rather than Dennis. Okay, fine.
Yeah, so I understand what you try to explain. It's from the context broker perspective, and what Annette was mentioning was to be able to connect with the participants, as we can see in this architecture. And to securely connect, of course, we provide those mechanisms as well in IFO-Trust by means of the key lock and proxy API proxy, right, Dennis? So
Yep.
with those components in between, parties can request data from each other. And of course, these components have been are compliant with iShare, so it becomes part of the trust framework, and that's how they can trust each other and share data with each other. So requesting part from other participants the data which is needed for process to run at a particular entity, that at real time can be accessed, provided that all the right authorizations are determined, either as predefined policies or from the transactional data itself. Does that?
So what this would mean is that when we've got this microservice listening onto the subscription, saying I want to upsert, I want to get hold, I want to pull my information, that would need to request a token, presumably, to say I am Annette, and then you could use that token through your key lock to say I would like to request from logistics to get hold of XYZ, and that would be the gatekeeper to say yes, I either allow this user to get hold of my information or not allow this user to get hold of this information. So, yeah. So let's move this on to data modeling, and ask Alberto, what entities do you see within this system? If you're to, what smart data models already exist which would be of use in this system, and how do you see these various data models connecting together? Alberto, can you put your mic on so that you can?
Okay. No, I was thinking that it wasn't the question for me regarding, because I don't think that the let's say the curators of the entities, I guess that we shouldn't be quite active about what entities should be defined, because are the users who should not ask but feel the need, because otherwise we could start thinking on behalf of the user, which is something that I guess is not absolutely desirable.
That's a fair point. But if you were in the position that you were architecting this, I'm saying, rather than necessarily just saying dictate it, what sort of, because obviously, as you said, the way that the users are looking at it is who's generating this. But imagine that you were the user, because you're Mr. Data Models. So I'm asking you a data models question as to what would you envisage. But you're quite right. We are not the experts here. So we would not be defining them ourselves, but hey, I haven't got a real logistics guy online, so you'll have to do it.
We have also a raised hand from the audience. I don't know if it's to answer the question, but I can maybe hand the mic to Daniel Vilalba.
Bring Daniel on board.
Yeah. It still says
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. I just wanted to share my thought about the question. At least of course I see the parcel, the packet entity, which is going to hold many information, a lot as the status of the delivery, also the address, destination address, is going to be shared between the players here in this use case. So at least I see this one, but perhaps, for example, I didn't understood which is the POD module that is appear in this concept, in this diagram. So let's I don't know, Annette, can you say that what is the POD that you describe in the diagram? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but Annette went.
Annette will have to come back on stage. I think she's on stage. So if she could raise her hand, is that raised hand again?
For example, the point here, as I see this entity with information that some of the players are going to write on it, or are going to put information in perhaps several attributes or properties. So the idea is how to manage, or the question for me is how to manage. Of course, I think you have to restrict the permission to write for just a few of them, but of course to request or to configure some specific subscription on the context broker to receive these updates on the several attributes. It is something that is, for me, is more or less clear. What do you think, Annette?
I'm not sure. Maybe Jason.
Right. Could various people mute, because I'm getting background noise?
Question. I'm not really sure I exactly explain.
I think what Daniel's pointing out is that there are parts of this entity which need to be shared, like the address, for example. It needs to be pushed to multiple participants. So instead of just having a read, there will need to be either a patch or an upsert pushed to the logistics guy, or pushed to the trucking system or whatever. Now, that again is perfectly doable, but the important point is that only certain parts of the payload should be updatable. So I would suggest that in this case, the central driving system would need to use patch, because that way you can restrict it to updating an attribute on a record, which is an entity, and that patch could then be restricted using keyrock or whatever, because you can recognize the path and you can recognize the fact that you could put a wildcard in the path saying /entities/wildcard ? And then the ATA you're allowed to deal with. So you could actually say, I am only allowed to update address, I'm not allowed to update banking details or something like that. Was that the thing that you went after there, Daniel, to try and understand how this system works?
Yeah. Yes, I think the example of the the identity and authorization components in the I4 Trust are going to deal with that. I agree in that point. So some of the agents are going to have a restricted permission to write on specific attributes. So yeah.
This brings up a very interesting question, is that when you're looking at modeling this system for an I4 Trust system, you need to not only consider what your entities are and what your attributes are, but which entities and which attributes need to be exchanged. And that's actually the key, is to actually designing the system first to work out how you're going to get the information coming through. In the example I came up with back on Tuesday, there was a common ID as an attribute, the legal ID of the animal, which is part of the animal data model. And
sorry, guys, there is some echo. Maybe everyone who is not speaking, also Annette, can we please mute to see if it's gonna get better? Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine. That's better. Okay. Yeah. So there needs to be some hook so that we know that we're talking about the same entity. As I said, within Mr. Logistics, they could have a different ID for that entity, but they will have an attribute which we must agree in common, obviously. So it could be package number XYZ. The way that you'd need to do the request and update and what have you would be something along the lines of request the entity ID which has this legal ID, and then do the patch using the standard NGSI way of doing stuff. Because obviously you, as a third party, have got no control of somebody else's system. All that you know from somebody else's system is that they are using NGSI, and you can request types. As I said, that's possible as well. So you should be able to work out what models they're using. So that, we know that you've got a logistics. That being said, it's most likely that if some company is going to join your consortium of trucking companies, they will be using the same entities for the same actions. So you're probably not going to need to have different entities for different companies for just saying, this is an address for logistics A and this is an address for logistic company B. If you do, then you start getting into having some really rather nasty business logic in your receiving endpoint for a subscription to say, I need to muck around with the data to do X, Y, and Z. In this case, maybe that, blah, 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 if then else, which is not ideal. But then what that means that you leave Eiffel Trust being is it's the secure data exchange part. So there might be other bits which, data's dirty, let's put it that way. Real life is complicated. And you might need to muck around or do a look up on a table or whatever to say, make sure I've got the right value in field X for that particular user. Obviously, in that case, you have a microservice, and I would really suggest that the ideal situation is where you can make that as data-driven as possible. If you look at the IT agents, for example, they are talking a fixed protocol. One's doing HTTP or MQTT or whatever, but there is a mapping as to what the various attributes mean inside the context broker compared to what they actually mean in the device itself. You could use the same sort of concept to say, okay, well, they're using logistics X is using the model Y, and I need to map my entity to their entity. This attribute goes there, this attribute goes there, and so on and so forth, to give you the flexibility to cover multiple third parties, which, again, this goes right back to the very first thing I said. You've got no control over third parties, and they will tend to follow their own, whatever the structure of the company is. So that's why you need to have this linked data stuff.
Jason, let me comment here. Exactly, this is one of the goals of the Smart Data Models initiative, just to provide some data models which are flexible enough for allocating the data that has to be interchanged, and not to need just this kind of translators between the data which are coming from one system to the data that is coming from to other systems. So if we share most of the elements of the data models, because I'm also realistic that not everything will be possible to be covered, because for whatever reason, but that most of the information will be just mapping. And in that sense, having not only common terms but also common definitions could definitely help on that. So because this is the idea. And as long as the definitions are free and available for everybody, it will be easy just to reach an agreement. And the point of the initiative is that we are open to gather or to standardize new needs that could be coming from the project, and therefore, so it's not something which is a static but quite dynamic, and therefore we are here for providing solutions. So hopefully, I encourage the participants just to get in contact with us regarding the potential agreements on data models that they can need.
I think we're both realistic here in that obviously, if everyone uses the same model, life is nice and simple. And obviously, as you said, the models can be extended to cover different situations. But imagine this situation, right? I have a logistics company in the Netherlands, and I'm connecting to a net system. And then this logistics company in Belgium also wants to join in. And by Belgian law, they need to fill in an additional field, which is irrelevant to the Netherlands because it's a different jurisdiction. But it is mandatory for our driver records or something like that. How would you go about having an element which is mandatory in my system but not in yours?
No, but this is the kind of situations in which possibly we won't be able to cover. It is also true that the point of something being mandatory or not is something in which we are, let's say, quite flexible, because what is mandatory in Belgium could not be in the Netherlands, could be different way in Luxembourg or in Finland or whatever. So in this case, the data model is not going to tell you, oh, this property is mandatory. No, this is, I guess, this is the kind of things that when you're using the data model, you have to design yourself. So if this is for you mandatory, that's nice, it's very good for you, but you cannot impose to the rest of the world that this property will be mandatory. So this is the kind of degree of customization that you need once you have agreed on most of the things of the data model, or what is compiling the data model for the data interchange. So I guess, there will be needs of customization, definitely. We are aware of that. But the good point would be just to share. Imagine that you share the 95%. So you are saving tons of time in terms of agreements and these kind of things.
Yeah,
And then when you're dealing with the final,
sorry, let me comment here as well.
yeah, sure.
Because we are now discussing in the more technical depths, but to begin with, in IFA-Trust, what we provide is also the concept of data spaces. So in that sense, what we are creating is a data space where participants come together and they all agree on these specifics which are needed for the whole data space to be operational and for use cases to be supported within the data space. So of course there could be differences because of the various geographical regions, or various regulations because of participants being in different countries, or because they are in different industries, different regulations apply to them. But that's where the linking point is that, of course, the at least all the common elements, as Alberto is mentioning, is driven by the smart data models that are created. And when there are differences, those differences are agreed upon how do we tackle within the data space, so that everyone understands what it means. So even if in the example that you gave, Jason, when you are part of data space and the Netherlands, the logistic company in Netherlands does not have that field mandatory, but Belgium has that in the data space agreement, and that's part of the operational agreement, that you make that okay, every other logistic company anywhere else will also support that, because it's the requirement of to harmonize this and make it interoperable with everyone, and give level playing field for participants within the data space, so that there are more logistic companies that can join that data space from Belgium, for instance, but also from other countries.
Yeah, I mean, what you'd need an agreed attribute name for Belgian driver's license, whatever.
Yeah.
Which would be an optional field, obviously.
Yeah.
But you'd also presumably somewhere in your models you'd have, the jurisdiction of a particular provider. So you'd know that this logistics provider is coming from Belgium, and the bit which would have to be done by the code would be to say, okay, if the logistics provider is coming from Belgium, I need to ensure that this field is filled in. It's certainly not the case that you can say, Belgian driver's licenses must be placed into every single record. But there needs to be a certain degree in the system to say, if this is happening in Belgium, then we need to make sure that the record is correct.
So I did mention support and not really like making it mandatory for everyone. So everyone has to support it,
point,
because if they are part of that data space and there are participants coming from different regions, of course they have the delta which is not applicable in every other region. Then that, how do you manage that delta? That is something that needs to be agreed on and supported by everyone. If it impacts their implementation or not, that is something use case specific. Because when as you are mentioning, if a driver or if the company is in the supply chain who are dealing you are dealing with, if one of the companies is in Belgium, then definitely that impacts your case. But in the same data space, there could be a supply chain where Belgium is not involved at all. Then that case is no longer applicable. So you need to have your system a bit flexible enough to support that.
Now, there are two ways you can do this, of course. You can either keep on adding in more and more attributes onto your entity, Belgian driver's license, Belgian this, Belgian that, Belgian whatever. Or you could have a relationship which says, I don't know, additional info or national info, which would then, the additional stuff would then go onto another record, another entity, which would then potentially be different if it was a Dutch supplier compared to a French supplier or a Spanish supplier, because obviously those legal requirements would be different. Now, this is the difference between what is generally called a strict ontology, where you have a something which has a something which has something else, multiple records, or a flat hierarchy, which is where you have one record which has got as much in it as possible. And it's probably worthwhile getting Alberto's view on that, as to whether a strict hierarchy or a flat hierarchy is preferred, and when you'd use one and when you'd use the other. So, Alberto, what's your opinions on that?
It's quite practical. So, and sorry, I'm proud to have no opinion. Let me explain. Because when you have an opinion and being the responsible for the curation, then somehow you're interfering what is actually needed. I prefer to be as few experts as possible, because what we have to do is to listen to user needs. So, and we have plenty of examples in which there are people telling us how the things should be, and we have people which says to us how the things are needed, and there is quite a difference between one and the other. And so that's why, as long as there is a use case, let me say, who should be in the Smart Data Models initiative telling the users what they need? So I guess it's something that we have to avoid at all costs. Having said that, it is true that we have to maintain some consistency between the data models, and they have to be reducing properties, reducing data types, and these kind of things. And I guess this is the only restriction, because why should a data model have only 4 properties or 68 like others? I don't want to say that I don't care, but it shouldn't be. We shouldn't impose restrictions to the people how to use the data models, because otherwise we're somehow interfering what is the actual needs. And if these data models are interfering what the people really need, what are we here for? So we are here for solving problems, not for imposing additional restrictions beyond those who are actually needed, because of course you cannot have one field for every country or for every region or for every city in the world. Yeah, that's right.
No.
But the fewer restrictions, the better.
Yeah, so that the whole point of getting along in the data space is that what is necessary is what is agreed on, and of course there will be always delta which are needed to support your own implementations that you take care of. Of course, that all depends on the use cases that we talk in, and I think we are trying to solve the whole use case in just one session, which which is not right, because of course we need to have more details around it. And of course, Alberto, I agree that we don't have to make it we don't have to impose anything. There's nothing that we are imposing. It's just that we have to get together and agree on what is the best solution.
This is very much the philosophy behind NGSI, and actually it's the European way of doing things. It's not the Chinese way of doing things. Chinese way of doing things is, everyone will follow this way of doing things. And equally, what Alberto was saying, it needs to be practical. And obviously, we are not the ivory tower saying you must do it this way. So this is the reason why the smart data models are there, to actually show practical data models, ones which are actually in use, rather than saying, theoretically it would be nice if X, Y, Z happened. Now, the reason why we're getting into the area where things start getting tricky is that this is the 20% use case. 80%, 90% of use cases will be able to happily agree on the data space and be able to use the standard attributes, and everyone's really happy about it. It's the tricky bit at the end where you say, well, what about Belgian driver's licenses? Where you need to ensure that you're not impacting the base model, and you are flexible enough to be able to take the additional requirements as necessary.
Exactly. So we risk to have something to have, let's say, an overpopulation of data models or something like that, or that some data models will partially overlapped. Yeah, this could also is something that it could happen. But whenever this could happen, we'll manage. It's happening partially in one sector, in tourism. And what we are doing is just extending the data models, because I have to remind everybody that you only need that part of the data model that you really need. So the rest of the properties could be easily ignored. They are there. You don't care. If eventually you don't have even to codify with something empty. No. They are irrelevant for you if you really don't need. Therefore, I guess that currently there is the possibility to be quite or terribly flexible. Not absolutely flexible, and we agree on that, but terribly flexible.
And this goes back to the diagram which Annette shared with us. There could well be stuff in my representation of the world as the logistics guy, which I don't share with you. And I've got an attribute for that, but your view of the same system hasn't got that attribute. It's irrelevant to you, or it's not not necessary, or it's too sensitive, or whatever. And you've just got a more general viewpoint, because you can have be still fulfilling the same data model without necessarily having as much data as I've got, because it's not relevant for your particular part.
Exactly. Definitely.
A good example of this is going to smart tourism, of course, where potentially, I'm in the middle of a monolingual of, say, an event is not going to have, is it translatable into French? It's the extension of the event which would allow you to say, okay, we are offering French subtitles, or we're offering an equivalent in Flemish or whatever, so that we can cover all the potential use cases in that particular region, which isn't going to be relevant elsewhere. So, given the discussion we've been covering so far, any further questions? Or does anyone else want to share a use case which they're dealing with? So, Manix, you want to join the stage? Sharifa, can you give him the rights? With Manix.
I was not. I didn't want to share my data model, but I was working. I am working currently in a smart destination model. The only standardized norm is the Spanish one. So I found a document in which they are already using JSON LD, but it's in Spanish. If you want, I can share it with you, and if you want to look at it and afterwards, share your thoughts about how they are using it. It may be, some kind of practical example on how they are using JSON LD for standardization.
Manix, is this the 178503 standard?
Yeah, I've shared it with you, Alberto, in a private chat. So that's the document from Segitur. I don't know if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's the guide. It's the guide for application. Yeah, I know. I'm aware.
Okay.
Sorry, I have to move now, but what you mean is quite interesting. Please keep on.
Okay, so.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, Jason. Just if you want, I can share the link with you, and then
share it in the chat. Share it in the chat because it could be of interest to all the participants.
Okay.
Notoriously, I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, that's the.
So the interesting point there is that when you have a standard, like a national standard, like the Spanish standard, and presumably, and this is not looking at the document at all, but presumably, some of the attributes are actually defined in Spanish. That's not a problem. Because what you can do if you're an Englishman like me is that you can have a separate context which would map the short names, the attributes, to something which is understandable to me in English. So within my system, I'm talking about hotels, HOTELS, and you're doing it with an extra E in it, I think it is. And there are one of a few Spanish words I think I can remember. That's not a problem because we are agreeing to the same long names, the IRIs. And if there is a standard out there, it's important to follow that standard. If necessary, there could be separate context files for it, but it's the standard which is the IRIs are the important bit because that's common for.
Yes, what I wanted to say is Spanish is the presentation I'm just sharing. I mean, all the texts are in Spanish, but there are examples on how they use the serialization in JSON and JSON LD inside. From pages 21 to further. It's just that it's a project we are working in, or we are working at, But since we don't have we still are figuring out all the structure and all these things. Meanwhile, because obviously the course is for these weeks and not a couple of months after, I said maybe this can be an illustration on how it is used in the real world.
I don't know if we've still got Alberto online because he just dropped for a second. But my viewpoint on things like this is that if you have a system which is working, which is actually in use, then it makes sense to ensure that you have a smart data model representation of it, because that will encourage reuse by other systems, and therefore you've got your proper data space. It's not necessarily the case that every standard which comes out there, everything which someone comes up with, is going to be directly usable, because it might be a theoretical ontological standard, or it might need a certain amount of manipulation or even restriction in order to be usable by in a real life use case in NGS-ILD. Case in point, the schema.org attributes tend to be relatively loose, and therefore you might be able to have an address field that says it can take either a structured address or it can take a string. Now, as far as the smart data models are concerned, that's useless, because you want to make sure that the data is well structured. So it says take the structured data. So it might be the case that there needs to be a smart data model's interpretation of 178.503 or whatever it's called, so that this is completely usable through an NGSI interface and more importantly, Exchange. The obvious difficulty, which I can see just glancing at the thing, is that, as you know, an NGSI-LD geopoint is always a location, and that is used for things like geofencing and whether you're in or outside an area. So having separate latitude and longitude attributes in a NGSI data model is an anti-pattern. You want to put them into geopoint because GeoJSON is assumed to be native. If necessary, I would not be against having separate latitude and longitude attributes if they are duplicates, because as Alberto pointed out, you can extend this stuff. It might be necessary in Spain to have a separate latitude and longitude attribute, but the core model I would envisage in smart data models would say location. This is location. Location is a geopoint, because it's leveraging on existing representations of geographic information which is already out there in JSON, and of course NGSI is a JSON format.
Well, this norm is relatively new, and they are revising it. Maybe Alberto, I think Alberto is in contact with all this the committee that makes all these norms. Maybe he can say something regarding that. Saying that they are revising it, because I was going to buy the norm, and it says that they're currently under a revision. Maybe we can find the things that you're pointing out on the next revision. Meanwhile, it's the only norm that we have found like in a standard way to define what is a smart destination. So that's what we are going to work on, and maybe, yeah, meanwhile, have this like a transformation between models from this standard to JSON LD to NGSI LD.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you've got there perfectly correct is that when you are trying to model logistics, trying to model tourism, trying to model cows, whatever, you do not start doing what I do and make it up as you go along. What you do is you find out what is the standard in the industry at the moment and work with that. Now, it may be the case that there needs to be a certain amount of tweaks or whatever to get it to map a theoretical ontological standard to a working system. But you don't go out and start making up your own models. You find whatever the latest working system is, and that is the basis. But what I can foresee here is that the smart data models will create a series of, or should create a series of models based on the Spanish standard, because that's the only one we've got out there at the moment, to encourage that use of an NGSI-LD model for data exchange thereafter. Because once it's an actual product, the difference is that the Spanish one, as far as I'm concerned, is theoretically use this. Whereas smart data models is always the case of this is actually in use. People actually using this. And if necessary, we can have this additional impetus by saying, yeah, it's based on X, but this is the bits of X which are really in use. No one uses the Belgian driver's license field. You can extend it if necessary, but the basic model is this, and you can then see that would be of common use to multiple parties.
Jason, in this case, how would you transform from one model to be NGSI LD compliant? Do you do it internally, or use something like Firewall Draco to transform the data into NGSI LD?
When I'm defining a data model, I consider NGSI LD. Oh, sorry, is NGSI? Yeah, both of them actually. NGSI v2, NGSI LD consists of several implicit rules, and the implicit rules are things like all date times are ISO dates based on Zulu time. All strings are Unicode strings. All geographic information is held natively as GeoJSON. And where there is potentially a conflict with those rules, I would, for NGSI Exchange, I would always say you follow NGSI. As I said, location is one of the 20 things which is defined within the core context. You want your location to be a location. There's no argument about that. If you can see conflicts between a standard, let's say it's got separate lat long, and you want it to be location, the data model I would suggest propose for smart data models would have the NGSI compliant bit, whereas things like lat and long would be your extensions, which you might or might not, optional fields as far as I'm concerned, because if you don't place your latitude and longitude into GeoJSON, you can't get the geofencing bit of NGSI. If you don't put your strings as Unicode strings, you're useless in Korea. Whatever, you just because your personal use case wants X, Y, or Z, it can't conflict with the data model, which should be of common use, can't conflict with things like that. So as I mentioned, if I want to get addresses addresses dates in Spanish, that's not my context data, because the context data has got no concept of nationality. And again, going back to the Belgian driver's license thingy, that has to be an optional field or an optional relationship, because truckers in Tenerife have got no interest in filling out their Belgian driver's license. So does anyone else want to share their current proposal or interfaces or whatever? And we can have, I can argue with them as well. Or am I scaring you all off now? As usual, this is just a live chat where we've got the a range of speakers. If anyone's got any questions to me directly, you can either do it through the I4 Trust stuff, or you can pick me up on LinkedIn or whatever. It's my job to try and explain this sort of stuff. So if I don't know, or it's not my area, I will attempt to farm the questions out to a more appropriate person.
We have about 10 minutes left in this session. Don't be shy to ask.
Then you can move on to the business stuff. Business stuff thereafter.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean the way I've been describing stuff, I've been considering where the problems will be, rather than where the flow works correctly. I mean, I think Rajiv got the thing quite right, is that it's supposed to flow nicely. It's supposed to the data is supposed to work nicely. We have a well-defined interface. We have a well-defined security way of doing the security. It should just work. But hey, I'm a cynical developer like the rest of you, and I think, well, but what about when this goes wrong, and what about that when that goes wrong? And let's face it, the majority of coding is covering for these edge cases. And it does help if you've got some understanding about how you should define these problems and how you should usually work around these, like say having additional relationships and don't keep extending stuff unnecessarily, or forcing people to fill in a Belgian driver's license, because it's going to be the edge cases which is going to be the development time, whereas when it's working properly, it should be relatively simple to say request the information from a third party, just to because you're talking using common models, and you've got a common understanding of how the identification of players in this system actually work.
I guess if there are no more questions, we can go into the break already.
I'm going to get myself a cup of tea.
Yeah, you need it.
What tends to happen in these, I end up talking far too much. People should tell me to shut up, but if you're talking, I will talk. Not a problem.
No, we're grateful for all the information. Okay, then I think we can end this part of the session. Thank you so much to all the attendees who came on stage and who made this discussion possible. And of course, thank you to our speakers and to you, Jason. Yeah, of course, feel free to hang out in the lounge and talk to each other. And let's come back at 10:30, I would say. Okay, see you.